Today, folks, we're starting a new series that I have yet to think of the title of, but hopefully my ingenious mind will discover something catchy or buzzwordy to put at the start of this video. So you'll know what the title is before I do. So there you go, you have the jump on me. Yes, we're going to start a new series, basically taking the comic book characters we know and love out of their familiar settings and placing them into the opposite or even just any random universe that we see fit. The example being for this episode, we're going to take Superman outside of the DC universe and plop him in the Marvel universe and kind of what goes on with that, what kind of stories you can get out of that. And joining me on this arduous task, crossing across boundaries of multiverses, holding the Bat Radar in his hand as he's hunted by Darkseid's legions sent through time, is one and only Mr. Jacob. How are you, man?
I'm doing well. How are you, sir?
I'm doing good. Excited to start the series with you. I think it's some nice, fun discussions that we can get done together, a bit of a lighter tone, while also maybe touching on some deeper topics that kind of arise as we go on.
Totally. And it's the question that's always on everybody's mind, too. Like, what would happen if this character were in this universe? And it's fun to address that and, take it in a more lighthearted approach.
Yeah, definitely. Basically just kicking off. Superman, the Man of Steel. As we know, he's like DC's premier, not just DC's premier. He is the founder of the genre. Superman is the guy that made superheroes. You've got other characters that have been inspired by pulp heroes like Batman with like the Shadow, and even stuff like Adam Strange. Not Adam Strange, bloody Doc Samson. There's an older character with Strange in his name. I can't think of it at the moment, but yeah. We've basically got those kind of characters influenced heroes, but Superman himself set the standard. He's the one who set the costume template, set the dual identity template. Everything spins out of him. And Marvel, interesting enough, kind of started out as the counterculture movement against what Superman established. The Marvel heroes in the 60s were completely different than the current DC heroes because they were broken, flawed, asshole-ish individuals that had to learn to be heroes rather than noble people starting out on a noble cause. So throwing Superman, who is inherently good, into this mix of inherently bad people trying to overcome that, obviously would lead to a lot of cool narrative discussions. And I guess I'll just ask, what on that base thematic level, what's your thoughts on that?
Yeah, it's super interesting because, like, if you look at it, there's really no, like, singular good figure, I don't think, in Marvel. And, like, I don't know Marvel as well as I know DC, but I can't think of like a Superman equivalent in Marvel, and maybe that's because they've never really tried it, or maybe they have. But like, Superman's kind of untouchable as far as the quality of person that he is, and which is why we always see like these attempts to make Superman dark, because he's the guy that's not dark. He's the guy that is the pinnacle, and there's nobody in Marvel like that. So seeing that applied to the Marvel universe, it'll be interesting to see like what we can come up with, how he would fit into that cosmology. And even like as I'm talking about it now, this means that if Superman's in the Marvel universe, like all of Krypton is, so then you've got like General Zod and even like something like Supergirl. With Superman comes all of that. So where does that whole thing fit into the Marvel universe? And that's going to be really interesting to get into that.
Yeah. So basically, in terms of just placement, the closest we have is like Captain America, but even then he's compromised because he's a soldier, and then he has to go through like dealing with like the government, and he's a lot more closely tied to that realm of like dealing with whatever era government he's in at the moment, whereas Superman is more general good, a worldwide good that isn't tied to America. Truth and justice, and then the American way got tacked on later. It's not the original quote. So Superman originally isn't about America per se. So if we slot him in, I'm just going to go through like saying the regular most stock origin events happen is we get him landing on Krypton. He's brought up by Ma and Pa Kent. He announces himself to the world through a series of saves. That ends with him rescuing a plane with Lois Lane, and Lois Lane writes the article on him, introducing him to the world. So we have his name, we have his basic power set, all that's kept in contact. Everything else is the Marvel Universe. How do they react to him?
Yeah, I don't know, like how, because you would have to imagine at this point in time, like if he's announcing himself to the world, a lot of those characters kind of popped up at the same time. So you would have to imagine like guys like the Fantastic Four and even like maybe an early version of the Avengers, like kind of like almost a little bit alarming, like this guy kind of comes out of nowhere. He seems like he can do anything, seemingly indestructible. And all of a sudden he's just like here to announce that he's going to protect the planet. And it's interesting because you would have to think like who would have a problem with it, who immediately would stand out against him. And I'm trying to think like, really, is Metropolis still a part of the Marvel Universe, or if because the Marvel Universe is set in like the quote unquote real world, is he more based out of like Kansas City? Like does Kansas City, Missouri or Kansas City, Kansas become the like fill in for Metropolis, or does like he move to St. Louis, or does he still move over to like the East Coast?
I think he has to move to New York just to fit in with the Marvel trend, if we're being like truthful about this, because Metropolis is often used as a New York stand-in.
I guess that is true. Yeah, I always hate just moving somebody to New York because literally everybody else is there. But
it's just a trope of it, I guess.
Right, that is a trope, but like. And I guess when you think about it, Superman literally like takes care of every problem in Metropolis, just about, right?
Yeah.
So you've got a guy that can take care of every single problem in Metropolis, moved into a city where there's already like tens of hundreds of other people taking care of every problem in that city. So you've got this guy that can basically do it faster than them. He would probably piss a lot of people off.
Oh, yeah, I can definitely see... well, first of all, I don't think Spider-Man even happens, because Spider-Man's kind of... Because the thing with Marvel is Marvel's all about... the heroes themselves don't necessarily do what the DC heroes do, where they go out, like, on patrol, where they go out and, like, protect from basic crimes. Like Iron Man never does that. The Fantastic Four don't do that. Because they're not superheroes first, they're superheroes second. Like Iron Man's an inventor, like global person first. The Fantastic Four are adventurers, like cosmic explorers and scientists first. They're not superheroes first. Spider-Man's the only person who goes on patrol, and if he's in New York and Superman's around and he's doing what everything Spider-Man could possibly ever do, but faster and more taking care of all his villains like they're nothing. I think Peter Parker just says, well, like my responsibility then isn't to the city because it's fine.
So Peter Parker probably has a drastically better life.
Yeah.
If Superman's involved, like he probably gets married early. Like Gwen Stacy probably never dies. So we probably never get Peter and Mary Jane. It's probably Peter Parker and Gwen Stacy that get married. Because of that, I
could see Norman Osborn going after Superman instead of Peter Parker, and then those two never become villains.
Yeah, because you could almost see. It's interesting that you say that because. Immediately when you say, okay, Superman's in Marvel, so then you think, who's his Lex Luthor? And Norman Osborn's probably the closest thing to Lex Luthor that you're going to get for Superman. And so really, like, you could even see Gwen Stacy and Mary Jane being swapped out for Lois Lane. So, Norman Osborn repeatedly goes after Lois Lane and all that kind of stuff. And it makes it even more interesting because he's already the Green Goblin. So we don't even have to change his color or anything. Like, you can see the hokey early Marvel stories. He's green because green is the color of kryptonite and all that kind of stuff. So that automatically makes him like a really good fit.
Mm-hmm. So just in terms of like, we have that's the closest thing I think of, because a lot of Spider-Man's, the reason why I go to Spider-Man specifically is Spider-Man is almost like, specifically when he was created, he's like the antithesis of, he's like Superman, but everything sucks. He's the nerdy, the guy who works at a newspaper, but instead of having the powers of an alien planet, he just has the power of like a bug. His boss isn't nice and kind and supportive of him. He's horrible and hates Superman and hates Spider-Man. His co-worker who works at the planet at the Bugle with him, see, even though I'm just mixing it up because it's so similar, doesn't hates Spider-Man but loves Peter Parker, whereas Lois Lane likes Superman but didn't pay attention to Clark Kent initially. It's just a lot of those roles are inversed. And if you throw Superman in there, he's obviously going to work at either the Bugle, maybe initially, but I could see Clark immediately walking out of the Bugle just because he cannot stand Jonah, and he finds his journalism, like, horrible.
Right, yeah, I could. That's really interesting, too, like, because if Spider-Man's not really around, then Superman kind of fills that void.
But I think Jonah would like Superman because he doesn't wear a mask. He's very open about everything he does. He's the kind of guy that Jonah would be like, this is what everyone else should be like.
And that's not what Clark's going for. Like, that is not at all what he's about. So, like, he's not like, he doesn't need his ego inflated. Yeah, so it's very interesting. Yeah, and then it really kind of makes Clark probably like his own individual journalist. And maybe this would even be where, like, you could see, like, the Daily Planet start up because maybe he leaves the Bugle and then decides he's going to try to set his own newspaper up. And then that would be how you would get maybe the Bugle or the Planet to form in the Marvel universe. But yeah, and then so then you would even have like competing newspapers. Yeah, when we started this episode, I was kind of like, I don't really, I was wondering where all we were going to go, but it really is kind of fascinating to see like how much changes for Marvel with Superman involved. But we were kind of talking about rogues earlier. Like who else do you think would kind of stand out as rogues for Superman?
Well, see, the problem is he's the Marvel Universe general rogues are basically nothing to him. They're a lot more street level. The power sets are a lot more, like, the only ones who could really challenge him would be like Thor and Hulk villains, at least initially. But even they are like very out. They're in like the desert or like in space with like Asgard and stuff. So Superman doesn't really go there, so he's not going to interact with them a lot.
Right.
I think Superman kind of would become a Hulk villain just because he'd stop him. Like, the problem with he'd just take the Hulk out and like as soon as he became a problem.
Yeah, okay. And so maybe you would even see like the Hulk not be a hero, he'd be a villain.
Or even because I feel like he'd work with Bruce Banner to find a cure. And then but then the problem with the Hulk is he's either got someone who can stop him with Thor, or he's got someone who can help him find a cure, like the Fantastic Four, but there's never someone who can stop him and help him find a cure, whereas Superman has got the brains and the brawn, so he could just, I think he'd probably cure the Hulk in like a month or so.
Yeah, really, and then that eliminates, and then you don't have to worry about, now there's no Hulk. Well, you don't need a Hulk, you've got Superman. And then, of course, you've got like Galactus and all that kind of stuff, but really, I mean, yeah, he would kind of stand unopposed in Marvel. For the most part, other than having someone like Norman Osborn to try to be like a constant nuisance, which would almost guarantee that you would have to bring over his, Kryptonian villains. You would have to bring over Zod and all that kind of stuff. Just because who else is Superman going to fight? Now that we're talking about it, do you think that they would have run out of ideas for Superman? Like, do you think that he would have existed maybe like through like the 60s and the 70s, but then like as they started to try to come up with new ideas for him without drastically changing him, do you think that he would have had a book that would have been canceled or something like that? Just because who else is he going to fight other than like moving him into space and having him fight people in space all the time or anything like that?
Well, you see, this is the kind of thing I'm interested in, because DC has Superman, and they've always had Superman, and they've built their universe around Superman, and even they don't know what the fuck to do with him sometimes.
Right.
Marvel, however, I feel would be the opposite problem, is because their universe isn't built around Superman, but there are so many Superman analogs like the Sentry, like Blue Marvel, like Hyperion, like Gladiator. All these characters are created specifically by Marvel, even Sun God with Jonathan Hickman. All these characters Marvel creates pretty frequently because they want Superman, because all these writers really want to write this character. I think a lot more Marvel writers want to write Superman than a lot of DC writers do, especially currently. That's why Bendis was so eager to jump on Superman immediately, and he's immediately doing wonders with him. Because I feel like Superman works for Marvel because, unlike the DC universe, Superman has to work to make the Marvel universe hopeful. Because Marvel universe is inherently cynical. They're inherently racist to mutants. They're inherently really awful people. Whereas the DC universe has its spots of awfulness, like even Gotham is like the prime example. But for the most part, the general populace is very hopeful and uplifting and will like inspire good in the world. I think you can make a lot more. I think instead we get a character a lot closer to his roots, as more of a social crusader who the stories aren't about him beating up the villain of the week. It's more about him solving the problem of like a corrupt businessman or a landlord or a husband abusing their wife. And the story isn't about if Superman can win, because of course Superman can win. It's about the emotions of the characters involved. Like All-Star or something. So I think we'd actually get a lot more quality Superman stories sometimes. I, of course, think there'll be some stinkers, and maybe he'll go through lowers and downs as people who don't get that. But I feel generally, Superman in Marvel would work a lot better to create stories simply because him existing there generates conflict in a way that him existing in DC doesn't.
Yeah, that's interesting. I hadn't really thought about it like that. So you would get a Superman that's not necessarily trying to stop Doomsday every week, but more about like trying to help us be better people. Yeah, that's kind of fascinating. You know, like with the whole Krypton, like everything else being brought in, though, do you think that Krypton would interact with like the Shi'ar Empire and all that kind of stuff? Do you think that they would, because that would have to happen, like they would have to bring in all of that? But that's probably another topic for another time, because that's,
I think the easy answer is I can totally see it being that Galactus ate Krypton and that's what blew it up.
Oh yeah, that is totally a very easy answer. Yeah,
because it's still a force of nature. It's still And you can make a story about that, because then Jor-El could be like, there's gonna be a giant purple man that's gonna eat us. So of course the Kryptonians just think, Galactus is a myth, he's not real, you're overacting, Jor-El. So it's still the same story. Because Galactus isn't evil. And so Superman then has to, maybe you get a really emotionally poignant Superman story about having to deal with the inevitability of death and decay and natural order, opposed against Galactus, the one foe he can't just punch out, because Galactus is way more powerful than Superman. So I feel that'd be a fantastic, like, 6-issue story. That'd be a classic if that happened.
Oh, for sure. Or you could even see that being like a summer event, you know what I'm saying? Like a Superman, Superman versus Galactus, but it's not what you think it would be. Mm-hmm. It doesn't end in a big punch-up brawl. It ends with like
him becoming his herald.
Right. Or, oh my God. Well, if you think like, oh man, Superman and Galactus, like then you have Superman and the Silver Surfer and all that kind of stuff,
the Silver Surfer and Silver Surfer would be like the most deep, like, that would, if those two were in a comic together, we'd find the meaning of life.
Yeah, right? Yeah, so you would get that, especially like the whole Dan Slott Silver Surfer, where like he was time traveling and he was going back and like trying to fix issues on individual planets, like a 12-issue story of Silver Surfer and Superman going around, and like issue 6 they go to where Krypton used to be. Oh man, I can't even imagine. Yeah, Superman. Should we like talk to somebody? Like, should we try to get like this move made? Because this is so interesting. Like, I think we really gotta like, bring this idea up to someone, because this is like a wealth of good ideas.
Yeah, I feel like again, I'm gonna say Marvel knows this. They know the potential. They're not dumb. This isn't a new idea, because there are so many Superman like copies or homages in Marvel. But none of them have been able to tap into potential, because at the end of the day, they're still not Superman. And no matter how close or how good you write a copy, it's still not going to be the real thing. So it doesn't have the same weight. It doesn't have the same mythology around it. So I feel like it's something that I hope will happen. We got a couple of Superman crossovers in Marvel, like the Superman Spider-Man crossover, the Marvel versus DC thing. But I feel like it is a good question, and like the Sentry mini. If for anyone who actually wants like a reading recommendation from this, the Age of the Sentry miniseries is effectively just what if Silver Age Superman was in Marvel, and then the Sentry original miniseries is like trying to fit classic Superman into the Marvel world with like maybe more disastrous consequences than what we're putting here. Because there is an argument to be said that Superman in Marvel be ineffective because Superman is always about inspiring hope and like changing the world for the better. But then you can't tell any more X-Men stories because if Superman inspires the populace to be tolerant, then that ends the X-Men strife. So he physically is doomed to fail in Marvel.
Right. Yeah. That is, well, and then like then you get into you've got characters like the Punisher and all that kind of stuff, like Superman having to deal with someone like the Punisher. Basically,
I think you just have like that Hitman issue where him and Frank would just sit on the roof and talk.
But I don't know. Like, is Frank as nice as Tommy is? Like, I don't know. If
I don't think so. But I also think he's because he's got like that same thing for like Captain America, is where he respects him and like he thinks he's a hero. I can imagine he'd have that same thing with Superman.
Maybe, but like Captain America also is like a military hero.
That's true.
And Frank's got military background, so like you would have an alien from outer space telling you to do the same thing and American heroes telling you to do. Oh man, you would even have like the Punisher maybe looking at Superman as an affront to Captain America. Like, why do you think you're better than him? You know, that kind of stuff. That would be, wow. Yeah, no, you made a good point though. Like, Marvel has tried to recreate Superman several different times and never really to any success. But it's very clear that like they believe that there is a place in their universe for him, and it would be interesting to see like what would happen if they actually like put him in that place, especially like given the current, you know, because we went back to all like Marvel through the ages, but it would be interesting to see like what would actually happen, how different Marvel would be if Superman had been there all along.
Definitely. And if any of you have comments down below about what you'd like to see, maybe story pictures or villains that we didn't touch on that you think would oppose against Superman, or what teams you'd like him to be on with the Defenders or the Avengers or even the Fantastic Four, post down below in the comments. We can get a good discussion about this. Maybe we'll even host like a sequel video to this later down the road, going through those comments and discussing those. But yeah, this has been really fun. I'm really looking forward to continuing this series and going through the breadth of Marvel, DC, and any other franchises we like. But yes, thank you for joining me on this, Jake.
Well, thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
Shucks. Golly gee. But yes, I hope you've enjoyed, folks. As always, take it easy. Have a good one.